Welcome to the Colby Cast, episode 45. Glad you could join us. Today, the cast interviews experts in dealing with mental health issues, specifically when it comes to homeschooling. We hope you'll learn as much from this important episode as we did. And as always, feel free to drop us a line at podcast@colby.org. Enjoy the show.
Hi there, I'm Bonnie, liturgical musician, popcorn and podcast fanatic, and Colby homeschooling mom to 4 lads and lasses of middle and high school age.
And I'm Hope, Bonnie's younger sister and a Colby alumna in a phase of life after being a student, but before becoming a parent. I studied communication theory and philosophy in college, then I went to law school. Now I'm an attorney, an avid home cook, and the fun aunt to Bonnie's kids.
We've heard during this crazy year of pandemic and a lot of emergency homeschooling and just a lot of differences in the way that we go about our lives. We've heard from the Colby advisors that conversations about mental health have been more frequent this year, especially about matters relating to students and parents' mental health and pandemic-related isolation. And I think this is a conversation that is so crucial to have, especially in our Catholic homeschooling community. And I think that the conversation about mental health, especially compared to its complement, spiritual health, is something that I'm really excited to explore. And Bonnie and I are thrilled today to welcome clinical psychologist Dr. Peter Malinoski and registered clinical counselor Jody Garneau, who are both mental health professionals and homeschooling parents themselves, to the podcast to have a conversation. So welcome, both of you.
Hi.
It is great to be here. Thank you for having us, Hope. Bonnie.
We are so excited you're here. Could you tell us a little bit about your backgrounds, both as mental health professionals and as homeschooling parents?
Sure, I guess I'll go. It's Jody. I have 4 daughters, and they were homeschooled from K to 12. So their first day at school, I always say, was when they went to college. And that was fun and challenging. And when the youngest was in grade 10, I thought I need another career. So I applied to Divine Mercy University and got a degree, a master's in clinical counseling, and started in the world of counseling. I was not just homeschooling my own children, but I was also teaching and consulting with homeschoolers before that. So,
Yeah, let's see. I'm the proud father of 7, and we also homeschooled them from early on right up through through the whole way. My oldest is now 23. My youngest is 8. I remember the first day I ever heard anything about homeschooling, because I'm old enough to be back in sort of before it was cool, or before it was well known. And I remember hearing about it, and I was like, we're going to do that. I want to do that. And so I was super excited about it from the get-go, and it's worked out really beautifully for us. As professionally, I'm a clinical psychologist. I've had an entirely secular psychology education. Most of the Catholic psychology graduate programs didn't exist when I went through graduate school. So, and I am super excited that this conversation about mental health is growing, because I lead this with Jerry Creed. I lead this online outreach, Souls and Hearts, and we really try to bring the best of Catholic psychology, grounded in a Catholic anthropology, to Catholics kind of through that outreach. So I'm really happy to see more and more people talking about not just spiritual formation, but also human formation. Right? It's not just about health, it's also about formation. And one of the things about homeschoolers is that they really have an investment in the formation of the children. So I think that's absolutely beautiful.
Well, it's such a pleasure to visit with both of you. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. I find it very intriguing how you, Jody, how it has unfolded for you and your family, homeschooling your daughters and helping homeschooling families, and now entering the mental health profession. And also you, Dr. Peter, with your own personal experience and your professional experience. I'm confident that will be intriguing to our listeners, both for your perspective and for those who would be interested in pursuing that path themselves down the road, if there are students or parents thinking, oh, that could be something. I didn't realize those programs were out there, that I can see myself serving that way. in those different respects. So I think there's all kinds of interest here for all sorts of people. I'm so glad and grateful we are broaching this topic today and having this conversation with you. As have been coming up, we had a few earlier in the season on the podcast with various guests, and now to focus on it today, though, well, not just one, but a related cadre of topics that we have for our plan today. So thank you again for that. I'm curious to hear how you approach broaching the topic of mental health with people who either it's just not part of it's not on the radar screen, so to speak, or there's a resistance there for one reason or another. How you kind of work around that to where it brings it up to a level where there's a willingness to have a conversation about it.
I think a lot of people are willing to discuss stress. That seems pretty benign, right? You're right. A lot of people are they're not very psychologically minded. They don't think in terms of internal experience. Stress is, though, something that is pretty ubiquitous. It's out there. People tend to experience it. They tend to acknowledge that. I tend to think about, like, what's the motivation that this person would have? What kinds of good motivations might we be able to connect with, right? And some people, frankly, they are not going to go inside. Sometimes that's because their own human formation hasn't included that. And sometimes it's because there's something really threatening going on there, and so it's not safe enough to do that. And so then I think about, okay, how do we try to increase a sense of safety? So you want to think a little bit about, like, why is it difficult, right? That whole kind of operating in the mode of the receiver.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah, it also makes me think that I think there is a tendency now to look at things more holistically. Like, we realize that when, for example, with homeschooling, if there's a learning problem, sometimes it can be, nutritionally related, or just something going on inside that has nothing to do with the actual, learning impediment. So I think I hear a lot more from moms that that's the way they approach things in their family, or another friend might come alongside and say, hey, have you considered this? So while they might be afraid of, and maybe rightly so, some of the psychological trends in the past that have kind of seemed very secular or very, kind of self-serving in a way that we wouldn't appreciate as Catholics, I think there's also a way to acknowledge that, we are human beings with emotions and reactions, and we need to take that into account. So I think if you come at it a different way, maybe it's sometimes the jargon that they're against or the history. So I think if you come at it in a natural way, and I think we as Catholics are perfectly positioned to recognize this, the union between body and soul, and that we're corporeal beings, like our sacraments involve the body, and the sacraments move us in many ways, not just intellectually, but spiritually and emotionally. So it's maybe just to appeal to the person, right? To their experience and make it less threatening, I guess.
Well, and a lot of times that's just a part of them that is cautious or is questioning, right? And so I've noticed I've had a number of clients through the years that came to me specifically because I was a Catholic homeschooling father, right? So there's a sort of sense of safety that, and there is every practice of psychology, every practice of counseling is based on some at least implicit philosophy, some implicit theology, some implicit metaphysics, some implicit epistemology. There's all these disciplines that inform the practice of psychology. And so, because we have this knowledge by faith that we have the truth and and the teachings of the church, that makes it so much more comfortable for some folks to be able to do that. So
what I'm hearing you describing is really an invitation to people when there might be some resistance or some caution, to really kind of invite them into an idea of safety or things like that. And that's really appealing to me. I think that, like the joke runs, right, is that the Catholic response to something bad is like, just offer it up. and it can be very dismissive. Go to adoration and it'll all work out, or things like that. And so these tropes of offering it up or praying it away, the true practice of offering something up can be really beautiful and very, very much a type of redemptive suffering. But I think the way that it's used in common parlance can really be kind of dangerous, and alienating, kind of dismissive almost. So I guess with that background, when you're getting to know someone's caution or trying to engage them, how do I want to phrase this? Kind of along those lines, could you describe some of the connections and the differences between spiritual and mental formation, and like you're talking about body and soul? And I know that is a huge question that could take the entire episode.
I think you're very right. It can feel very dismissive to say, just offer it up, because I think everyone, especially our teenagers and our young adults, they want to be heard, and this is what I've heard from my own daughters at college. They'll tell me that other fellow students, they're in a Catholic school, feel distressed because their parents will say that to them, and they feel like they're not connecting, right? So I don't know how we got stuck in that message, because there's value in that. I totally agree. I've offered up many things, but it's not one or the other, right? It's both and.
Mm-hmm.
And so how can we really hear the person and be with them and kind of meet them there? I think that's the parents, that's our challenge, right?
St. Thomas Aquinas said that grace perfects nature. It does not destroy it. And so I really think about this human formation as the foundation for the spiritual formation, right? So really think about, for example, John the Baptist. What did he do? He prepared the way for the Lord, right? And so I really believe that when we bring that order in the natural realm within us, that means in terms of our interior integration, our emotions, our feelings, our memories, our body sensations, our thoughts, our attitudes, our impulses, when we're familiar with who we are as a person on the natural realm, we've got a much more solid foundation for building the spiritual life. Because anything that's really disordered, anything that's dysfunctional in that human aspect is going to have an impact on our spiritual lives. If we have difficulty relating, for example, to authority figures because of experiences we've had, traumas and so forth, it's going to have an impact on how we relate with God, right? Especially God as King, right? And so if we have issues with men, right, because of traumas or whatever, that's going to make it hard to connect with the humanity of our Lord Jesus Christ as true man, not just true God. So what I really think about as a Catholic psychologist is what kinds of things, if we resolve those issues in the natural realm, would help us to be able to be united with God in beatific vision, be united with Our Lady. And so that's what I think. That's what I think psychology can be so helpful, because you're right. There's a lot of what we call spiritual bypassing. And that's when the definition of spiritual bypassing by John Wellwood, who coined the term back in I think 1980, it was in the early 80s. And it's interesting because he was a Buddhist mental health professional that found that a lot of the Buddhist practices were being misused to sort of paper over natural level problems, right? So spiritual bypassing, the tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing emotional issues, psychological wounds, and unfinished developmental tasks. And so what you see is like in Catholicism, right? You can see, well, that's just my cross, right? When, you start to unpack this, and it's really a natural level phenomenon. It's a kind of a cross of my own making, right? Which actually makes me less able to bear the crosses that Christ really wants me to bear, for example. And you had talked about, just offer it up, but that can be very dismissive. That can be another way of saying, I can't hear your issues. I can't engage with that. I don't want to talk about that with you. But it's packaged in a way where it sounds, Catholic, and it sounds pious or something like that. So, and I think that kind of stuff actually, is really common in a lot of circles, especially when an alternative vocabulary really hasn't been developed yet. So
I was just thinking along those lines that a lot of people, I think, envision the saints as being kind of without emotion. Like if I was really holy, I would just be like this calm, still water that's just kind of, and that's not who they are, right? I love reading the lives of the saints and seeing their passion or their sufferings, and they didn't go through it untouched. That would make it not actually sanctifying, right? So how do we relate to those stories? And I think they can sometimes be an inspiration for us to see the saints as persons that have this whole range of, living in the world and reacting to the world as we have to do too.
That's beautiful. And like you were talking about before we got started, Dr. Peter, like there's that issue of breadth versus depth. So I hate moving us along to the next bullet point, but I think that they correspond. Jody, in our conversations before recording, I thought you raised this wonderful point that the primary educator, whether it's usually mom or dad or just the parents in general as primary educators of the children, the parents' mental health matters. And the parents' experience with emotions and stress responses matter. And so could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. Because you take on so much more when you homeschool, right? And it's a very unique path. As much as we have a whole bunch more people in the boat this year with the pandemic, it's still very unique, right? And it can be a struggle, right? And sometimes we get really hard on ourselves when we find it hard, and when we're feeling maybe we don't want to get out of bed, or we feel very scattered about who's behind and what have I not done, and you're frustrated. You've spent the day, you felt like herding cats all day. I know that feeling. And if mom, you have to acknowledge this can be hard. And I found that hard as a homeschooler. And I know with my homeschool friends, who do you say that to? Right? You're not going to say that to your mom if she's wondering what the heck you're doing homeschooling, or your mother-in-law who's wondering how you compare to the school down the road, right? You're not going to say it's hard. So you have to have a circle of friends that are trustworthy, that you can say, I'm having a hard day. I'm ready to send, Timmy to the army, and he's maybe only 9, but I'm tired of asking for the spelling or the math or whatever. So we have to allow ourselves to be human. Like we're going to have days where we're tired too. Maybe you were up with the baby, maybe you were up with a sick child, or just maybe you had things that you had to take care of. So just you are not running a school. You're managing a home and you're educating. And so how do you make allowances for that? And then if mom has a problem with emotion, then when she has emotional children exhibiting emotions, that's going to be hard, right? So how does she prepare herself to be with a child who's, having that meltdown or feeling the anxiety? The more we can be the calm for the child, everything goes better. So if that means, y'all need to take a time out, then y'all just be together and say, let's put the books down for a minute. At the end of the day, that's more important lesson than the spelling test, right? You have to keep your eye on the whole picture. So I think homeschooling's better for mental health. You think of your little kids, they aren't away from you for 8 hours,
right.
And then you're trying to guess what happened all day. What happened all day, right? So you're in the rhythm together, which can be irritating. But, but I used to be thankful for it. Yeah, if mom is struggling with burnout or anxiety or depression, get the help. Whether that means turning to your spouse and saying, help, I need you to back me up. I'm not getting any work out of him this year or this week. I need you to check on the kids, help me with that. There's certain ways that the parents can come together to support each other. So it's not just the mother feeling like, it's not always the mother, but often the one just kind of slugging through the whole, pushing everything, because everything is on you, right? Every shoe, every hair, brushing the hair, making the beds. Now it's the algebra and the Latin test and the spelling test. So that's a lot. And you just need to acknowledge it sometimes. Like, yeah, I'm having a hard day. Maybe I need a break on, this week. And that's not being soft on yourself. That's being realistic, right?
I think that can be so, when we are able to do that, that can be so instructive to our children as well. Almost narrating out loud, I'm feeling this way. I need to do this for a moment. I need a moment. And maybe talking through things as best we're able to, or even just demonstrating that we're going to give this another go. We're going to take a minute. We're going to read a book together or have a snack or something, whatever, some kind of break in action or whatever. Hopefully that will be helpful to them down the road when they find themselves in whatever situation. Hopefully it'll plant a seed somewhere that will sprout when they need it to.
I love that because, yeah, modeling it and allowing for resets, like even verbalizing that. Okay, I think we need a reset here. Let's go back. And I remember having to check my internal emotional, temperature, what was going on. And at one point I recognized I was being set off by the talk radio I was listening to. And I thought, okay, I need to cut that out. It's not actually my child that's triggering me. I'm already very escalated. And then they ask one more thing, right? So I have to own that. Like, okay, I'm going to monitor, am I getting enough sleep? Am I getting to eat breakfast? Am I being able to spend time in prayer and just try to get the rhythm? You're not running a school. If you put that pressure on yourself, that becomes unrealistic because a school has staff and a school has all kinds of resources, right? And they don't take the kids home at night. So it's just a different thing, right? Yeah.
And children are intensely curious usually about what's going on inside their parents. That's really, if there's a bond there, there's a lot that they can learn by you sharing what your internal experience is with them in appropriate ways, of course. But yeah, it helps them to make sense of their own experience, because children have a tendency to personalize things, and to think that they actually are responsible for things that happen because of, some kind of issue that's going on just within the parent. So that's a real gift to give to children. Again, in a thoughtful way. That doesn't mean that every emotion or everything that's going on inside the mom or the dad needs to be shared, but that is a gift to kids.
What you're describing about the children picking up on the parents' state and the people around. Dr. Peter, you mentioned that your oldest is 23. I'm 28, so I was homeschooling and that before it was cool time as well. And I remember having a lot of anxiety myself and picking up on, I think, our mom's anxiety of, am I keeping up? Am I keeping up? Because we didn't have many benchmarks to compare ourselves to. And while there are more resources now for homeschoolers, there's still, I think, almost over motivation sometimes with homeschooled students to try to prove themselves or to try to be diligent and detailed. And we had a couple of college professors on the podcast recently who were describing about how the homeschooled students they get are great. They come up, they introduce themselves to the professor, but they also have the tendency to show up in office hours almost too much, or to come in after an 89 and say, what can I do to get better? And so you were talking about the kind of distortions on the natural level and how they affect the supernatural level. So I'd love to hear your insights on how to encourage healthy internal motivation from students and healthy diligence without encouraging them into a lot of this perfectionism on the natural realm or scrupulosity on the supernatural realm.
Well, most of the things that we think of as psychological disorders are really just symptoms. Okay, they're really symptoms. When you talk about depression or anxiety or panic attacks or manic episodes or even psychosis, those are all just symptoms. That's the end of the causal chain. When you actually trace those things back, you get to the roots of what's going on, you actually see that those are all driven by unmet needs. And so there's a finite number of unmet needs. There's attachment needs and there's what I call integrity needs. So I'm going to be thinking about, okay, let's instead of like snipping the leaves off a weed, instead of just treating the symptoms, let's see if we can take it back up the causal chain to the primary causes. And so if we look on the natural level about what attachment needs are, there's 5 major attachment needs. First one, feeling seen, known, heard, and understood. That's the first one. Second one, feeling safe and secure. The third one, feeling comforted, soothed, and reassured if one is upset. The fourth is feeling cherished, rejoiced, and delighted in. The fifth one is feeling that someone has my best interests at heart. Somebody's looking out for me. Somebody's got my back. Those are the 5 major attachment needs. And then the integrity needs, I exist, and I exist in my own right as a separate person. My identity is stable over time. I can regulate myself. I can make sense of my experience inside and of the world around me. I'm integrated interiorly. I have dignity and autonomy, and I have a sense of mission and purpose and meaning in life. So when you actually take any symptom and you like begin to trace it back, you'll find that it's going to hit one of those needs or more. So anxiety, that's a physiological thing. It's a physiological response in addition to being an emotion, right? But what is it saying? It's saying something's not right. I'm in danger. I have a need that's not being met. And so one of the things that I do encourage parents to do is, okay, let's go back to these attachment needs. Let's go back to these integrity needs. What might be going on inside of a child, or what might be going on inside of me that's setting off the symptoms? Because the symptoms are there as gifts to tell us that something's wrong. And they always get us, right? Because, if it's a symptom that doesn't work, right, then it's not meeting its function. So there's going to be a symptom that comes up that grabs our attention. It's always going to be uncomfortable enough to try to motivate us towards some kind of more effective action. But in our culture, we often mistake the symptom and we believe that's the cause. And that would be like going into an emergency room. If I was your ER physician and you came in and you had intense abdominal pain and a high fever, and I gave you painkillers and Tylenol, and just treated the symptoms, I haven't done you any favors, because when your appendix ruptures, you're going to be in a lot worse situation than you were before. So this is where that human formation is really helpful, because it's also in these things, in the natural realm, that we get our first experience and we begin to generalize as to who God is, and so you can see those different levels, right? Scrupulosity has a lot of not feeling safe, not feeling secure in God's love, not being enough, feeling inadequate in a spiritual way, and a lot of anger about that is not able to be even acknowledged within us. So when there's scrupulosity, I tend to look for where's the anger and aggression, and how would that ever be addressed, for example, in the relationship with God. It's a really common factor there. It's not always what drives scrupulosity, because again, scrupulosity is a symptom, right? It's a non-specific symptom in a lot of ways. You can't always, just like a fever is a non-specific symptom, right? It can be generated by a lot of different causes. That's why attempts to treat symptoms without getting at causes can be kind of unreliable.
If you could share your wisdom on allowing kids to fail.
For me, I see it as, if they can't learn to fail and manage disappointment in the loving environment of my home, how will they face that first failure out of the home? So I think as homeschoolers, we do try to protect them from that, right? We want to keep rewriting that paper till we get it just right. And there are times where they will fail, and then the lesson is that you're more than the letter grade, right? Or you're more than what you did in this. But if we always smooth the path and make it, we do all the work around it, and it keeps them from having that feeling and experience. I think Peter might have a different point of view, even from a father's point of view, and on the failure part.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when we don't want our kids to fail, it's because we don't want to be failures. We don't want to be looked at as failures, right? So that goes back to
Yes.
some of the burdens that can be put on kids inadvertently and with, good intentions. It's understandable. But a lot of times failure is looked at only on the side of commissions, right? Only on the side, I tried something and it didn't work. And so in order not to fail, I'm not going to try this other thing, right? And so one of the huge costs of this is that there's becomes this huge issue of omissions. What don't I do? What risks don't I take? Some of the most successful people in a worldly sense are the ones that have failed the most, right? 10,000 attempts at the light bulb, right, for Thomas Edison, right? And I think the same thing happens in the spiritual life. I think we need to be able to try things, right? Otherwise, we're going to be really constricted and, not reach out, not take those risks that it takes to love God and to love our neighbor. And so one of the things about childhood that can be particularly encouraged in a home environment in a way that's not as possible in an institutional school is that freedom to let's try it. Let's see what happens, and to see that failure is not something that tells us we're not worthy, that we're inadequate, that we ought to be ashamed of ourselves, or whatever those things are that keep us in that really constricted, inhibited space. So
I am liable to get pretty down on myself thinking, oh, I should have seen that. I should have done this about that. I should have taken care of that. I'm not doing enough to take care of this, that kind of thing. So it shows up with me and them. So you referencing what's going on with the parent is helpful too. I think we are confronted with our own, where we are as people more, maybe not, I don't know, maybe I'm just speaking personally, that it comes up, my own things I need to address come up in much sharper relief these days.
And that's by God's design, right? Our children are going to pull for the very things that we need to work on. They're going to know what levers and buttons to push. They're going to be able to get under our skin in ways that nobody else can. And that's a gift to us because it allows us to know where our growing edges are, the things that we really need to be working on within the natural realm, within the spiritual realm. And so it's hard, though. It is, one of the things, Jody, you addressed was just appreciating how much you take on when you homeschool. It's a whole different way of life, actually. There's a reason why, kind of schools were, originally popular, right? When they first developed, it was yeah, wow, this is amazing. And even before, if you look at the history of home-based education, it wasn't what a lot of people are doing now. There's been a huge amount of development. There wasn't the attempts to do as much as a lot of families are trying to do with regard to meeting all these requirements for college entrance examinations and all the kind of pressure that can come with that. So
on the other hand, now there's so many more opportunities for families, right, to make use of classes and tutors or just other ways. So I love to think of it as the mom is the general contractor or the overseer. She does not have to do every piece, right? That's a burden we take on, and we feel like a failure if we can't, do the algebra or keep up with the really bright child that's challenging us. And knowing when to bring in help and when to bring in even a mentor, even if it's a subject you can do, I could do Latin, but my child couldn't do Latin with me. So those are two different things. And recognizing, okay, she needed something different, right? Now that struggling Latin child is a Latin teacher, but it took some patience and some encouragement and somebody else other than me to do it. So,
yeah.
Especially in the high school years. I mean, you want to distribute this. It does take more than just the mom and the dad. It takes a village, it really does. And the kids really need to experience, meeting others' expectations as far as their academic work and so forth. And you have a limited number of what I call idiosyncrasy chips. You have a limited number of things that you can sort of enforce, right, in a home environment. And if you're going to burn them up over this algebra problem, you're not going to have the same ones, for the house cleaning, or for the development of a particular virtue, or for other things that are really important in the formation of that child. So yeah, you have to be thoughtful. I mean, that whole idea of St. Paul, right? Fathers don't nag your children. You have to be careful about like how much of that you take on just on your own. So
true, and that the idea of the currency, so to speak, the chips that you're the idiosyncrasy chips. It's like a type of currency. It's limited.
Yeah, it's limited.
Yeah, Bonnie and I had a conversation not too long ago about how the phrase parents as primary educators necessarily implies other educators as well, because if you were the only educator, you wouldn't need the word primary in there. And so that, I think, goes back to Jody's point about you're kind of like the general contractor. I hadn't heard that analogy, and I like it.
Yeah, I like that one
for that
one too.
So along those lines of when to look outside of the home for support or assessment or things like that, especially psychologically, I guess kind of a two-part question: how to get this process going, and also there are so many types of mental health care available that it can be hard to know when to go to a counselor versus a social worker versus a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And here I go again with the really big questions. I'm sorry about that. but I guess, yeah, how to get the process going and where to look.
I have a really short answer to that. At Souls and Hearts, at soulsandhearts.com, we have 2 free courses. They're video courses. One is a Catholic's Guide to Choosing a Therapist. And we go through in that course all kinds of things. That's at soulsandhearts.com. And the other one is a Catholic's Guide to Self-Help. And that one's actually really good if you're trying to figure out like, where do I need to go? Kind of gives you some base guidelines about like how to do a self-assessment or how to work with. There's also another course called the Catholic's Guide to Helping a Loved One in Distress, which can also be really helpful if you're looking towards somebody else in the family. So those were the first 3 courses that we built because we knew there would be questions like this. So those are available there. But I would say, to take some time to just inventory what's going on inside. I mean, the first thing that I tend to recommend that people do is set some time aside just to be able to check out what's happening inside. Sometimes journaling is helpful to put experiences into words, because if we can't put them into words, we can't think about them very clearly. And we need actually that language a lot of times to be able to work conceptually, to engage the sort of left brain with the cognitive left brain, with all the stuff that's going on in the right brain in terms of the intensity of emotions and so forth. So, and it also allows us to share it with other people once we can symbolize it in language. So to actually be able to talk about it with somebody, to be able to write about it so that we can at least come into a way of symbolizing it is often a huge relief, just to realize that, oh, I am feeling this, and because we might not have known that before. We had the intensity of the experience, but we didn't have the way of understanding it. So.
Yeah, and what you're saying, Peter, that would also slow down the process. I spend a lot of time with my clients, just let's slow down, whether it's in couples counseling or parent-child or individual, let's just slow down what's happening, because it happens so fast. It's so habitual. It's a cascade of, I went from this to that, I went from she spilled the milk till I'm like yelling like a crazy person, and the neighbors are probably going to call somebody and I won't get a choice of which person I talk to. It happens so fast. So just slowing it down and being aware of like, okay, yeah, I'm really, feeling this, and and when I feel this, then I start to feel anxious, and then, I'm worried about the schedule or whatever is happening for me as the mom, but also it's a good modeling for the kids.
Do you find that to be something that we can sort of build up to in the moments, like we can recognize when things are happening, if we notice a pattern, if we discover that we're about to hit this iceberg, once we kind of deal with the immediacy of that or whatever, sort of some of the takeaways from that can be, let's work on the conversational skills, the journaling, the language skills around that when things are relatively stable, so that people start to have that ingrained, or even we can widen the lens a little bit, however we want to look at it, that we have a little bit more advanced warning, as much warning as we can have, that we can kind of see it coming a little further out, that we can start engaging some of these skills we're trying to build so that it doesn't reach the point where I mean, it will still happen, I bet, but with less frequency, hopefully. So anyhow.
Yeah, and there's times to address it and times not to. So when everyone is very escalated, a lot of the language centers are even offline. So it's not helpful. And I probably am more guilty of that than other mothers, of like deciding now's the best time for a rant about what just happened. My Newfoundland background, I think. But, just recognizing there's a time to have that discussion, maybe not in the heat of the moment. And like, the child's not going to absorb it. I'm probably not going to be my best self. Like, there does feel sometimes as a parent, like I've got to use this teaching moment right now. And it's not a teaching moment if you're not in a teachable space and they're not in a space to receive it, right? Just come back later when it's not so intense.
Have to battle against that tendency to think I've got to do something about this right now, and then it kind of ends up being too much. Yeah, overcorrecting a bit. Yeah.
In line with what you're describing about the times to work on it and the times to just live through the moment when it is pretty intense, Jody, you had sent us 4 practical tips, and we'll put these in the show notes along with links to Souls and Hearts, Dr. Peter's courses that he mentioned, and also if our listeners are interested in more on scrupulosity, Dr. Peter was a guest on the Catholic Therapist podcast on an episode devoted to scrupulosity. So all of these will be in the show notes for resources. But these 4 practical tips that you sent, Jody. 1, help forming feelings into words. 2, parts awareness. 3, scheduling quiet time. And 4, grounding methods that are simple enough for kids. These sound awesome. I would love to know more. I'm intrigued. So could you describe them a little bit more for us?
So it is valuable to help our children have the language, as Peter was saying, to name what they're feeling, right? And I like to make my children own their own feelings and not say, she made me so mad. It's like, no, there's a part of me that's feeling really angry right now, or part of me is really hurt. And as they get older, you can there's all kinds of feeling charts you can print off if you want to see the variety of feelings. Great homeschool lesson on, there's different types of anger, right? I'm enraged, I'm frustrated, I'm irritated. And we know from what we know about psychology, just naming these things helps us to recognize, okay, that's what's going on inside, and be aware. So it's kind of a first step. Parts awareness, Peter's talked a bit about that too. Like, we have different parts, right? A part of me, and it's so healthy to help children see this, like a part of me really loves my sister, but a part of me wants to, take that toy back because she's making me really mad. And being able to talk in parts internally helps them kind of externalize and recognize it's not necessarily I am 100% angry, but a part of me is angry and a part of me still loves. And that's a great way, even as parents, to identify our parts. The scheduling quiet time, I think, is so important. We know we need quiet time when they're little and they take naps, but we give it up too easily. Quiet time, even if it's just quiet creative time for a child, just mother needs that, right? Whether it's after lunch or early afternoon, just even 20 minutes, half an hour of the house is going to be quiet. And I don't mean electronics. So some quiet time, because that we know that helps with, just emotional regulation and brain development. So, and then grounding. So grounding can be things as simple as just focusing on what you're doing in the moment. So a lot of our childlike activities are grounding. Things like, if everyone's feeling really antsy, playing something like I Spy, just noticing something blue in the room. We do this as therapists, we ask people to, what 5 things you see and 4 things going down the list, you do the different senses, which is another thing you can do with kids, right? Playing with that. But even things like blowing bubbles or playing with Play-Doh, a lot of the things we skip over because we think, well, that's not important. I got to get through the spelling test. But music, art, just sensory things, these are very grounding for children. Noticing your body right now. Are you sitting on the chair? Do you feel yourself sitting in the chair? that brings them back to the moment, and then they can regulate at that time. I would say another one that we didn't add there was actually play. And I think sometimes as homeschoolers, we don't leave time for play, but play is how children learn to self-regulate. So there needs to be time for that in their day, even as they're older. And by play, I don't necessarily mean, the park, but like not mindless, but like just open time of exploration and joy, whether it's through music or dance or, get out the Lego. There's all kinds of ways to allow them to do that. And that's how they do develop emotional regulation.
It's easy to slip out of that habit of guarding that time, setting that time in place. Like this is a mainstay of our day, just like our school subjects are, just like meal times are, whatever. It's almost the first thing to go in some ways when
So
we get
true.
kind of distracted or get busy or something unexpected happens. And I think I can see a difference with that when that is missing, how people are faring with each other. Yeah.
Homeschooling parents tend to be, in my experience, because I've done a fair number of consultations with kids that have gone off to college or into the military or into the workforce after homeschooling. And parents tend to be about a year to 2 years behind the oldest kid's developmental trajectory. That's because they've got so many other kids a lot of times, right? And they're familiar with like working with age brackets. The oldest one is always breaking new ground, right? My oldest, Grace, we talk about it. She was the practice child, right? Like she
Yeah.
broke us in as parents, right? And it's not only the oldest child, but it's the oldest child of each sex, right? So you might have 3 girls and then a boy, that's often a real difficult learning experience too, because it's different. There are these, clearly identifiable sex differences. So parents often got to spend a little extra time on that oldest one, which can be hard, right? Especially if you're hoping the oldest one's going to help you out with the management of the household and all the other things that are going on. 7 kids we totally got, drawn into that at various points, right? So that's another thing to just really consider, that oldest one, the oldest one of both sexes. That's really, really important. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've had the algebra battles with Grace too. I mean, a lot of the things that you were talking about,
Same here. Same here.
It's, my wife was really good at realizing, hey, she can get to heaven without having completed algebra 2. So it's not a requirement.
Yeah.
I'm just still chuckling at the idea of the oldest child being the practice child, because there are only the 2 of us, Bonnie and me. So
Explains a lot. Yep. Now, me as the mom of kids who are adolescents, so I have 2 boys and then 2 girls, but yes, I can see quite clearly what you mean about the differences between them, how my interactions with my girls are distinct from my interactions with my boys. Even, it's just how we are made, I think.
There's a lot of impact of biology, of endocrinology. Testosterone makes a lot of difference in the ways that we relate. We're embodied beings, right? We're bodies and souls, and those bodies have a huge impact. So it's a very different thing for sons and daughters.
Sure, including birth order and personality, right? You see right from the womb their little personalities. So as much as when we have a large group of children, we want to batch raise them, we can't, because they're individuals, right? And that bites us all the time when we try to just, for convenience sake, we'd like everyone to just cooperate in this one way.
That's right.
It doesn't work.
One of the great things that we discovered that was just a lifesaver for us is we had this concept of snippets. And snippets were a period of time of 5 to 10 minutes each day when each child got to spend that with just mom or dad, right? And so each child each day got between 5 and 10 minutes with dad and then with mom. And what we found is that if kids could rely on those snippets, like we got that time back in spades, in terms of like just knowing that there was a time, like, that was one of the first words that our kids learned, like nippet, my nippet, was like one of those things, right? Like if the
Oh.
child started to approach during snippet time, there would be this guarding of it, and it was just great. And as they get older, right, they use that time for different things. And now my older ones, batch that. Sometimes they just want to spend an hour on a weekend together, and so we don't necessarily hit every. But for the little ones, for them to know that if they want to talk about what happened, they've got that time with dad. When after he comes home, it's really, really precious. So I thought I'd throw that in there just as an experiment to try, right? 5 minutes a day. Doesn't have to be something really huge. And then we let the kids pick some kind of activity that's appropriate for that time within reason, right?
That's great. And then they know to expect it too. That's different than all of a sudden or spontaneously we have this pocket of time together, but they know it's coming. That makes a big difference.
That is a huge containing function. We would talk about that in psychology as having a containing function, because we know that there's going to be a forum in which we can raise this question, or we can address this concern, or I can explain to mom finally why my brother is such a pest, or whatever. I mean, and the idea is that we really want to be focused on that particular child in that moment. So
that's big. Yeah. I really appreciate all this you have given to us and the time you've taken with us.
It's been a pleasure to be here with you, Bonnie. It's a pleasure to be here with you, Hope. And of course, I'm very fond of Jody. So, to be able to spend a little time with you doing this. Jody actually helps with the human formation stuff we do for Catholic therapists in the interior therapist community at Souls and Hearts. So huge role there. So she's also a big part of our, of our team at Souls and Hearts as well. So. And if folks want to learn about human formation, in the month of June, we're taking in members to the Resilient Catholics community, and we've got a whole program of human formation there. There's all kinds of information about that at soulsandhearts.com/RCC. So if people are interested in a really coordinated program to help with that human formation, we actually think we've got the first one that we can offer to lay Catholics. So that's another possibility for folks that we're really excited about.
Wonderful. Tremendous help to families.
This has been so enriching and enlightening. I know for both Bonnie and me, and I'm sure all of our listeners. Thank you, Dr. Peter. Thank you, Jody. Your experience and your insight as mental health professionals, faithful Catholics, and homeschooling parents is just, it's a treasure. And we are very grateful for the time that you've spent with us. As I mentioned before, the show notes today will have lots of links to Souls and Hearts and various resources that we think that will be helpful to families. We'll have Jody's tips in there, and thank you.
It's been a pleasure to be here with you both. Thank you.
What a great service you're giving to your families. It's great.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much.
Mary our Mother, pray for us. St. Maximilian Kolbe, pray for us. Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam.